8 months pregnant, stripped of everything, and thrown into a blizzard by the man who vowed to love her. Serena Ashcroft had nothing left but the child fighting to survive inside her. No money, no shelter, no one coming. But fate doesn't always send angels. Sometimes it sends something far more dangerous. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, stay until the very end. Because this story will hit different. Hit the like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The accusation came on a Tuesday. Not that the day mattered in the end, but Serena would always remember it was a Tuesday because she had spent that morning trying to hang blackout curtains in the nursery, standing on a step stool with her belly so heavy she had to grip the window frame with both hands to keep her balance. She had been thinking about whether the crib was positioned too close to the heating vent. She had been thinking about names. She had not been thinking about Damien because Damien had been distant for months, and she had decided, somewhere around her 6th month, that distance was the version of him she could actually survive. Then his assistant called, not Damien himself, his assistant, and told her to be in the main conference room of Voss Capital Management at 2 o'clock that afternoon. No explanation. The assistant's voice had the careful, overworked flatness of someone reading from a script they had not written. Serena changed out of her paint-stained maternity top. She drove herself because the car Damien had assigned to her had been mysteriously unavailable since the week before, the driver not answering texts. She parked in the underground garage beneath the 40-story building she had walked into hundreds of times as Damien Voss's wife, and felt, for the first time, that the building was looking back at her. The conference room on the 32nd floor held 9 people she recognized and 2 she didn't. The 2 she didn't know were lawyers. She could tell by the way they held their folders, not like they were protecting documents, but like they were preparing to deploy them. Damien sat at the head of the long glass table. He had combed his hair differently. It made him look older, or maybe just more deliberate, and Serena's stomach clenched in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. "Sit down, Serena," he said. She didn't sit. "What's happening?" One of the unfamiliar lawyers opened a folder. He laid a printed spreadsheet on the table and slid it toward her. She looked at the columns of numbers without touching the paper. Her name appeared at the top. The account numbers beneath it were not accounts she recognized. "We've completed an internal audit," the lawyer said, "and the findings indicate that approximately $14 million was systematically transferred from Voss Capital's discretionary fund over a period of 18 months into accounts registered under your name and 2 shell entities you control." Serena looked at Damien. He looked at the table. "That's not true," she said. "The documentation? I don't care about your documentation. I'm telling you what's true." She pressed her palm flat against the spreadsheet. "I have never seen these account numbers. I don't know what shell entities you're talking about. Someone needs to explain to me what is actually happening here." The second lawyer, a woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, spoke without looking up from her own folder. "Mrs. Voss, there are wire transfer confirmations, login records, and 2 signed authorization forms with your signature. We've had 2 forensic accountants independently verify the documentation." "Then your forensic accountants verified forged documents." Silence. Damien finally looked at her. She had loved this man. She had stood beside him at his mother's funeral and held his hand when he cried and convinced herself that underneath the coldness and the control and the $300 haircuts, there was something real. She had been pregnant with his child and believed, right up until this exact moment, that it still meant something. His eyes told her it meant nothing. "Your accounts have been frozen as a precautionary measure," he said. "Company security will escort you to collect your personal items from the residence. Anything purchased with company funds stays." "The residence." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "You mean our home?" "The home is held in a corporate entity. It's a company asset." "Damien." She said his name like a question and a warning at the same time. "I am 8 months pregnant." "I'm aware." "You're throwing me out of our home while I'm 8 months pregnant. You'll be given 30 minutes to collect your things." The room was very quiet. Someone's phone buzzed against the table and nobody moved to answer it. Serena stood there with her hand still flat against the falsified spreadsheet and felt the baby shift, a slow, deliberate roll, like the child was repositioning to brace for something. She pulled her hand back. She picked up her bag. She did not cry until she was in the elevator, and even then it was only for 11 floors, and then she stopped. Security gave her 22 minutes, not 30. Two men she had never seen before, younger than she expected and carefully expressionless, stood in the doorway of the master bedroom while she moved through the walk-in closet pulling clothes from hangers. She took what she could carry. She left her jewelry because some part of her brain was already operating in triage mode, calculating weight and necessity, and she knew on some instinctive level that what she needed right now was warm layers and shoes with grip, not earrings. She took her laptop. One of the men told her she couldn't. "This is my personal laptop," she said. "I bought it before we were married. There is a sticker on the bottom from a coffee shop in Portland that I visited in 2018. Would you like me to describe the coffee shop?" The man stepped aside. She took the laptop. They walked her through the lobby of the building that had been her home for 4 years and out through the front entrance. And the doorman, a man named Theodore, who had held umbrellas over her head in the rain and once helped her carry 6 bags of groceries without being asked, looked at the floor when she passed. She understood. He had a job. People kept their eyes down when they needed to keep their jobs. The temperature outside was 9 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast she had checked that morning had predicted a storm system moving in from the northwest, the kind of deep winter front that weather services described with words like significant and dangerous. She had made a mental note to pick up extra candles in case the power went out. She had not made any other preparations because she had not known she would be standing on the sidewalk at 4 in the afternoon with 2 bags, a laptop under her arm, and nowhere to go. Her phone showed 11 missed calls from her sister, which meant Damien had already contacted her family. She knew, without calling back what had been said, or at least the version that had been said, and she could not handle that conversation right now. She called her friend Petra instead. Petra didn't answer. She called Marcus, who had been Damien's friend first and theoretically hers by extension, and Marcus answered on the second ring and immediately said, "Serena, I can't get involved in this," and hung up. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed through her nose and counted backward from 10, which was something she had learned to do a long time ago in a different kind of terrible situation, and she reminded herself that she had survived that too. She needed a hotel. Her personal credit card was attached to an account that Damien's lawyers had not technically frozen yet. It was a separate account, older, under her maiden name, but it had a limit of $2,000, and she did not know how far $2,000 would get her in a city where she had no allies, no income, and a baby that was going to arrive in approximately 5 weeks, whether she was ready or not. She started walking toward the parking structure. Her car was still there. That was something. The wind was already picking up. By 6 o'clock, the snow had begun. Not gently. The storm didn't have the decency to ease in. It arrived the way catastrophes arrive in this part of the country. Sideways, sudden, with the full force of everything that had been building invisibly for days before anyone thought to pay attention. Serena was on Route 9, heading toward a motel in Kellerton, 30 miles north, because it was the only place she could find online that had rooms available at a rate she could afford and didn't require a credit card she trusted Damien's lawyers not to flag. She had made it 18 miles when the car died. Not dramatically. The engine simply stopped producing heat first, which she noticed because the cold became suddenly more specific, more present, locating itself in her fingers and in the back of her neck. Then the dashboard lights flickered. Then the wheel stiffened in her hands. She managed to get the car halfway onto the shoulder before it lost power entirely, and she sat there in the silence with the snow coming down hard enough to reduce visibility to almost nothing and understood, with the particular clarity that comes when your options have narrowed to essentially zero, that she was in serious trouble. She tried the ignition 6 times. The battery was dead, or the alternator had failed, or something else entirely had gone wrong with a car that Damien had insisted on maintaining through his own mechanic. She remembered now that she had mentioned the engine light twice in the past month and both times been told it was nothing, that it had been handled. She wondered, sitting there in the dark with the temperature outside dropping past 0, whether that had been handled the way so many other things in her life had apparently been handled. She called roadside assistance. The automated system estimated a wait time of 3 hours minimum due to storm conditions. She called 911. The dispatcher was professional and calm and told her to stay in the vehicle, that emergency services were responding to multiple accidents across the county, and that her location had been logged. Estimated response time was unavailable. She had no food. She had a water bottle that was 3/4 full. The car retained heat for about 20 minutes and then became indistinguishable from the outside temperature. Her coat was a wool peacoat, stylish but not designed for sustained exposure to wind and sub-zero cold. Her boots had 2-inch heels. She got out of the car. She didn't decide to. Later, she would not be able to explain the decision clearly because it wasn't really a decision. It was more like her body responding to something primal and insistent. The knowledge that staying still was a slower version of the same outcome, that she had to move, that the baby needed blood moving through her body and heat generated by muscle, and she could not sit in a metal box and wait to be found. She walked along the shoulder of the highway with one bag and the laptop, leaving everything else. The snow was above her ankles and the wind was in her face, and every step required more effort than it should have because her center of gravity had shifted progressively over 8 months, and balance was a negotiation now. Every movement calculated slightly later than she wanted it to be. She kept one hand at the base of her belly without thinking about it. Protective. Automatic. She made it perhaps 300 yards before her body sent her a very clear signal. Not pain exactly, pressure. A deep tightening low in her abdomen that she had been warned about and that was supposed to be nothing at this stage but felt, standing alone on an empty highway in a blizzard, like everything. She stopped walking. She breathed. She counted the seconds the way the prenatal guide had told her to count, measuring duration and interval, and when it passed, she kept moving. It happened again 2 minutes later. She reached the guardrail at the highway's curve and held on to it with both hands and let her head drop forward and breathed through the second contraction, because she understood now that they were contractions. And when she lifted her head, she saw headlights. Not one set, multiple. Coming from the north, moving slowly through the whiteout, a convoy of vehicles spaced in a deliberate formation that she recognized, even in her compromised state, as intentional rather than coincidental. These were not separate travelers who happened to be traveling the same direction. These vehicles were moving together. 4, 5. She counted 6 matte black SUVs before she lost count, and behind them something larger, possibly an armored transport. They were slowing. She couldn't tell if they were slowing for her or for the conditions, and she wasn't sure it mattered. She stepped away from the guardrail and raised her arm, and the headlights of the lead vehicle flooded her, and she stood there squinting into the light with her coat dusted white and her hand at her belly and the storm coming down around her, and she did not look like a threat. She looked like exactly what she was. The lead SUV stopped, then the others. The doors of the second vehicle opened. 2 men got out, large, wearing tactical gear under their coats, earpieces visible. They moved toward her with the careful, practiced economy of people who were never off duty. One of them had his hand inside his jacket. "Ma'am?" The one in front stopped about 6 feet away. His eyes moved across her quickly, assessing. "Are you alone?" "My car broke down." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "About 300 yards south. She stopped. Another contraction. She breathed through it with her jaw clenched and watched the man's expression shift from professional neutrality to something more complicated. "I'm 8 months pregnant, and I may be in early labor, and I need help." He turned and spoke into his earpiece. She didn't hear what he said. The man who got out of the third vehicle moved differently than his security team. Not faster, actually slightly slower, more deliberate. The way people move when they have spent long enough being the most dangerous presence in any room that they no longer feel the need to perform urgency. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now something more interesting, sharper, more specific, marked by choices. Dark coat, no hat. The snow settled on his shoulders, and he didn't seem to notice. He stopped at the same distance the first man had stopped. Looked at her. She had the dizzying sensation standing in the blizzard on the side of a highway with her legs shaking and her body contracting around something that was not ready to happen yet, that this man had looked at a great many things in his life and was very good at understanding what he was seeing. "Roman," one of the security men said quietly. It was meant as a warning. The man named Roman didn't look away from Serena. "How far apart?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "The contractions." How far apart? She stared at him. About 2 minutes. He said something to his security team that she couldn't hear over the wind. Then he looked back at her. There's a heated vehicle, he said. A doctor on call 40 minutes from here. You can refuse and we'll wait with you until emergency services arrive. A beat. Or you can come with us. I don't know who you are. No, he agreed. You don't. Something about the honesty of it, the complete absence of reassurance, cut through the noise in her brain. Every instinct she had was lit up and screaming, and she sorted through them quickly, the fear and the cold and the pain, and what she came back to was simple. She was 2 minutes apart on a highway in 0-degree weather, and emergency services had given her no estimate. Whatever this man was, whatever these vehicles were, and whatever their convoy was doing on this road on this particular night, she was looking at warmth and a doctor against an empty highway and a storm with no ceiling. She said, "Okay." He nodded once, turned to his team. "Get her warm. Get Halverson on the phone." One of the security men stepped forward to take her bag. She led him. Another opened the rear door of the third SUV, and the heat that rolled out was so immediate and so profound that her knees actually buckled slightly at the threshold, and a hand, Roman's hand, caught her elbow without ceremony and steadied her. She got into the vehicle. The door closed. Through the tinted window, she watched Roman stand in the snow for a moment, his back to the vehicle, looking south down the highway in the direction she had come from. She could not see his face. She watched him until the convoy began to move, and the darkness swallowed the road behind them. Her next contraction started 40 seconds later, and she gripped the leather armrest and breathed, and did not make a sound. The compound was 45 minutes north through mountain roads that the convoy navigated with the ease of familiarity, the lead driver barely slowing for curves that appeared and dissolved in the headlights, with almost no warning. Serena sat in the back seat with a heated blanket across her lap, provided wordlessly by a woman she hadn't noticed until she was already inside. Compact, maybe 35, dark hair pulled straight back, no visible weapon but the posture of someone who carried one. The woman told Serena her name was Yara, and that she was not a doctor, but she had training, and she monitored Serena's contractions for the entire drive with 2 fingers on her wrist and a watch face she checked in the glow of the dashboard. "How bad?" Serena asked, around minute 25. "Consistent," Yara said. "Not accelerating. That's what we want." "I wasn't due for 5 weeks. Babies aren't much for schedules." Serena almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost laugh, the fact that some part of her body still had the reflex. She pressed her hand to her stomach and felt the child move, a definitive shove against her palm, and thought, "Okay, still here, still fighting." Roman sat in the front passenger seat the entire drive and did not turn around. She could see his profile in the ambient light from the dashboard, the hard line of his jaw, the stillness. He spoke twice on the phone in low, clipped sentences she caught fragments of. Something about a location, something about a timeline, something about the doctor that she chose to believe was about her and not about something else entirely. She needed to believe it was about her. The compound revealed itself in stages. First a security gate, heavy steel, flanked by cameras that tracked the convoy's approach. Then a long private road through snow-weighted trees. Then lights, many of them, the main house emerging from the dark as something large and deliberate, built into the mountain rather than placed on it. Not a mansion in the decorative sense, a fortress in the functional one. Roman helped her out of the vehicle himself. He didn't offer his arm the way someone performing courtesy would. He simply positioned himself at her elbow as she stepped down, solid and close enough to catch her if she went sideways. And she did not go sideways, but she was glad he was there. Inside the house, warmth hit her like a physical force. The entry hall was stone and timber, severe and purposeful, and 3 people appeared from different doorways immediately. One was the doctor, Halverson, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and the direct, economical manner of someone who had been excellent at her job long enough that she no longer felt the need to explain herself. She took Serena's wrist, looked at her pupils, asked 2 questions about the contractions, and said, "Let's get her horizontal." "I need to know what's happening to my baby," Serena said. "I know," Halverson said. That's what I'm about to find out. They took her down a hallway. Serena glanced back once. Roman was standing at the entrance to the hallway watching her go, hands loose at his sides, face unreadable. She held his gaze for 1 second, 2, and then the hallway turned, and he was gone. The contractions slowed. Whether it was the warmth, or the horizontal position, or the medication Halverson administered with quiet efficiency, by midnight the worst of it had receded into something manageable, and the ultrasound confirmed what the doctor told her in plain, direct language. The baby was head down, healthy, showing strong vitals, not in immediate distress. Preterm labor, likely stress-induced. Not optimal. Not catastrophic. You need bed rest, Halverson said. Real bed rest. Not take it easy. Horizontal. Calm. No significant exertion. I don't exactly have a bed right now, Serena said. Halverson looked at her for a moment without expression. You have one tonight, she said. Sleep. Serena didn't think she could sleep. She was wrong. She woke at 3 in the morning from a sound she couldn't place. Footsteps in a hallway, she thought, moving with purpose. Or maybe she had dreamed it. The room was warm and quiet. Outside the window, the storm was still going. She could hear it, the low, consistent pressure of wind against stone. She lay in the dark for a long time, with her hand on her belly, and thought about Damien. Not with grief, she was surprised to find, but with the cold, specific focus of someone whose fear has finally converted itself entirely into something more useful. He had set her up. That much was clear. The accounts, the documentation, the timing, it was too clean, too complete, and it had been ready too quickly, which meant it had been built before it was deployed, which meant it had been planned. She had stood in that conference room and seen the answer on the faces of every person in that room, even Damien's, especially Damien's, and it was not the face of someone making a hard decision. It was the face of someone completing a transaction. She needed to know why, not because she had any illusions about what that knowledge would cost her, or what it would take to survive what was coming, but because she had 5 weeks before her daughter arrived in the world, and she was damned if she was going to let that child be born into whatever this was without understanding what she was fighting. She was still thinking when she heard the knock. 3 knocks, quiet but not tentative. She sat up. Come in. Roman opened the door and stood in the doorway. He had changed out of his coat, dark shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbows. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but he didn't look tired. He looked the way some people look when they don't need sleep so much as they need time to process, and he had used the hours. How are you feeling? He said. Not a question. Better. She watched him. What did you find? He was quiet for a moment. What makes you think I found anything? Because you've been awake, she said, and because you didn't stop those men from bringing me here out of charity. You stopped them because something about my situation interested you. He looked at her steadily, and then he came into the room and sat in the chair by the window, not close, just positioned so they could talk without her having to crane her neck, and she understood the consideration in that without it being announced. My people pulled your name from a financial monitoring system we run independently, he said. Serena Ashcroft. Before tonight, we had a flag on anything connected to Damien Voss. She felt the cold enter the room, even though the temperature hadn't changed. Why do you have a flag on my husband? Because 3 months ago, a man named Curtis Bell reached out to 2 of my business associates. Bell is a financial fixer. He structures offshore accounts, manages dissolution of assets, keeps certain transactions invisible. He told my associates that a very significant sum of money would be moving through unconventional channels, and that he was looking for parties who could facilitate the transfer without documentation. Roman paused. The sum was in excess of $200 million. Serena did not move. My associates declined, Roman continued. But we kept the flag active, because men like Bell don't approach people like my associates unless the source of the money is something they can't clean through conventional means. He looked at her. Your name appeared in our monitoring system tonight, connected to a fraud accusation. Your husband's company. 14 million. 14 million, she repeated slowly. Out of 200. 14 million is the frame, Roman said. 200 is what they're actually moving. The silence between them lasted several seconds. They used me as a decoy, she said. Looks that way. She breathed through her nose. She pressed her palm flat against her abdomen, feeling the weight of her daughter, the insistent living fact of her. What happens to me now? If the 14 million accusation stands, what happens? Criminal charges, civil forfeiture. Anything in your name becomes contestable. He didn't soften it. And once you're tied up in legal proceedings, no one is looking at where the rest of the money went. And my daughter? He said nothing. Roman. She said his name for the first time, and something in the room shifted at it, something small but real. What happens to my daughter in this? He looked at her, and whatever he saw when he looked at her right now, the woman who had walked 300 yards on a highway in sub-zero temperatures in labor rather than sit and wait to freeze, the woman who had not once asked him for reassurance, only information. She watched something in his expression make a quiet, irreversible decision. Nothing, he said. Not if I can help it. Outside, the storm pressed against the stone, relentless, without mercy. And somewhere in the city she had left behind, in the clean glass offices of Voss Capital Management, in the phones of politicians and lawyers and financial fixers who thought the loose end had been tied, something was already beginning to unravel. She just didn't know yet that the thread Roman's people had pulled on that night would eventually tear the whole thing open. But Roman knew. He sat in the chair by the window with the storm at his back and watched her eyes stop being afraid and become something else entirely. And he understood, with the particular clarity of a man who had spent 20 years reading situations that other people missed until it was too late, that whatever Damien Voss had built his careful, documented, professionally orchestrated trap around was not, in the end, the fragile woman he'd expected to put in it. He had made a very serious mistake, and Roman Sorrento was already counting the cost of it. Roman left before dawn. Serena heard him go. The low exchange of voices in the hallway, the precise click of a door pulled shut by someone who had long ago learned to move without announcement. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the storm finishing itself outside, the wind dropping in increments, the silence filling in behind it the way water fills a space, patient and complete. She did not sleep again. By 6 a.m, she was sitting up in bed with her laptop open, working through what she remembered of Damien's financial architecture from 4 years of marriage to a man who believed in compartmentalization the way other men believed in discipline. She didn't have access to anything proprietary. She had never been given access. Damien had kept his business and his marriage in the same careful separation he applied to everything in his life, and she had accepted that separation because she had believed it was professional habit rather than strategy. She understood now that she had been profoundly stupid about that, and she allowed herself 30 seconds to feel the full weight of that stupidity, and then she moved on because she did not have time for 31. What she had was memory, and her memory was good. 4 years of dinners with board members, charity events, conferences she attended as the wife, and used as an opportunity to actually listen. She had a law degree she'd never practiced, suspended the year she married Damien at his quiet but consistent suggestion that her time was better spent elsewhere. She had stopped noticing how many of her choices over 4 years had been shaped by his quiet but consistent suggestions. Until right now, sitting in a stranger's mountain compound, with the echo of labor contractions still in her body, and the recognition was so clear and so total that it felt less like an insight than like a physical fact she had simply failed to observe. She opened a blank document and started writing down names. Yara brought food at 7. Not asked, not announced. She simply appeared with a tray, set it on the bedside table, and looked at the laptop screen with the practiced non-expression of someone trained to notice everything and register nothing. "Roman wants you resting," she said. "Roman can want what he likes," Serena said without looking up. "Who is Curtis Bell?" A half-second pause, barely perceptible. "Where did you hear that name?" "Roman told me last night." She did look up now. "He said Bell approached his associates 3 months ago. I want to know what kind of operation Bell runs and who he typically works for." Yara set down the tray more slowly than she'd picked it up. "You should eat." "I'm eating." Serena pulled the tray closer without breaking eye contact. "And you're going to tell me about Bell?" "I'm not clear to—" "Yara." She said the name the way she used to say Damien's in the early years, before she'd learned that tone was wasted on him. Direct, without hostility, with the specific weight of someone who was not going to be moved by deflection. I am the person this operation was built around. Whatever you know about Curtis Bell is information about my life, my daughter's life. I'm not asking for Roman's files. I'm asking what you know. Another pause, longer this time. Yara pulled the chair from the corner of the room and sat in it backward, arms crossed over the top rail. Bell is a cleaner, she said finally. Not physical, financial. He specializes in asset transfers during litigation, divorces, bankruptcies, corporate dissolutions. He makes money disappear before courts can touch it, then makes it reappear somewhere else under a different name. He's been operating for about 15 years. No criminal record because the people who use him have never once needed to testify about anything they did with him. Who are his clients? People like your husband, and bigger. Bigger how? Yara looked at her steadily. The kind of bigger where the names are on buildings. Serena absorbed that, picked up a piece of toast and ate it without tasting it, because Halverson had told her to eat, and she was going to follow at least that instruction even if she couldn't follow the rest. Roman said 200 million, moving through unconventional channels. That's not a divorce asset transfer. No. That's something else. Yes. What is it? Yara was quiet for a moment, and Serena watched her doing the calculation. What she was cleared to share, what Roman would want shared, what the situation actually required. She seemed to land somewhere in the middle. What we think, Yara said carefully, is that your husband's fund has been operating as a pass-through for a significant period of time. The investment returns are real, but secondary. The primary function is intake and redistribution. Money comes in from sources that can't be explained. It gets laundered through legitimate investment cycles. It comes out clean. How long? At least 6 years, possibly more. 6 years. Serena had married Damien 4 years ago. She had spent 2 of those years not quite believing something was wrong, and 2 of them knowing something was wrong and choosing, for reasons she was going to have to sit with for a very long time, to stay. She thought about her law degree gathering dust in a filing cabinet and felt something tighten in her chest that wasn't regret so much as the specific cold fury of someone who has finally identified exactly how they were used. They needed someone to blame when the structure started to attract attention, she said. A wife is clean, Yara said. Sympathetic, on paper. Hard to prosecute aggressively if she has no prior history, no sophisticated financial background. The defense almost writes itself. She was manipulated. She didn't understand what she was signing. Courts are lenient with that narrative. Except she was never going to get to court, Serena said. Yara didn't answer. Because she and her baby were supposed to disappear first. The silence in the room had a texture to it. Yara held her gaze without flinching and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Serena picked up the second piece of toast and ate it methodically and stared at the wall and thought about her daughter. Roman returned at noon. He came into the main room where Serena had relocated herself. Halverson had cleared her for limited movement, horizontal when possible, no stairs, and found her at the long table near the window with her laptop, a legal pad covered in her handwriting, and 3 empty coffee cups arranged in a row like a timeline of how the morning had gone. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the legal pad. "You've been busy," he said. "Sit down," she said. "I need to show you something." He sat. Not where she indicated, was across from her, his own choice of position, but close enough to see the screen. She turned the laptop toward him. "I've been reconstructing what I know about Damien's board structure," she said. "I can't access the actual financials, but I know the names. I've been cross-referencing them against public records, SEC filings, anything I can pull up without a password." She tapped the screen. "This man, Gerald Fitch. He's listed as an independent director on Voss Capital's board, but he's also a named partner in a law firm that represents 3 of the shell entities your people flagged." Roman looked at the screen. His expression didn't change, but something in his focus sharpened. She could feel it across the table, the quality of his attention shifting from observational to operational. "That's not publicly connected," he said. "Not obviously. But the law firm's registration is public, and the shell entity filings are public. And if you put them side by side, she pointed, Fitch is the structural link. He's the one who built the architecture. Damien is the face, but Fitch is the engineer. Roman was quiet for a moment. How did you know to look for the shell entity filings? I'm a lawyer. He looked at her. I have a suspended license, she clarified. I haven't practiced in 4 years, but I know how to read a corporate filing. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise. He didn't seem like a man who surprised easily, but something adjacent to it, a recalibration. You never told Damien you were looking at his structure. I never looked at his structure while we were together, she said. I trusted him. A beat. And he knew I had the training to look, which is probably part of why he kept me so carefully occupied with other things. Roman said nothing to that. He took the legal pad and read through her handwritten notes with the same focused silence he seemed to bring to everything, and she watched him read and tried to determine what exactly she was dealing with. She had been in this man's compound for less than 24 hours. She knew his first name. She knew he ran something that required 6 armored vehicles and around-the-clock security, and she knew that 3 months ago he had chosen not to facilitate a transaction that would have made him significantly richer. That last fact was the one she kept returning to because it was the fact that didn't fit the obvious narrative. Your associates, she said. The ones Bell approached. What did he offer them? A percentage of the transfer, Roman said without looking up from the pad. 8 points. That's $16 million. Yes. And they turned it down. I told them to. He set the pad down. Bell's operation attracts federal attention the way a light attracts moths. Anyone he's worked with in the last 3 years has been subpoenaed at least once. The money wasn't worth the exposure. That's a practical reason, she said, not a principled one. He looked at her. Did I say it was principled? No, she said. I'm just locating where you actually are. He held her gaze for a moment, and she had the sense again of something being assessed. Not unkindly, not with the clinical detachment of Damien's boardroom calculations, but with the direct and somewhat uncomfortable focus of someone who was accustomed to seeing through the surface of things. You're trying to figure out if you can trust me, he said. I'm in your compound, she said, pregnant, with no allies, no resources, and a criminal accusation pending against me. Whether I can trust you is somewhat academic at this point. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. He almost smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, but it crossed his mouth briefly, and she noted it. The fact that there was something in there capable of that underneath everything else. Fitch has a partner, Roman said. Name is Lena Marsh. She's a forensic accountant. The good kind, which means she's very good at making documentation look airtight. My people flagged her 6 months ago connected to a separate transaction. We never found the link to Voss Capital. He tapped the legal pad. This is the link. Serena felt the information land with the specific weight of something that mattered. So Marsh built the fake paper trail that condemned me. Almost certainly. Can you find her? Already have people on it. She looked at him. You've been working this since last night. Since about 4 this morning, he said, when your name came up in connection with Fitch in a property record. A pause. You didn't know you had property in common with Gerald Fitch. She stared at him. I what? A residential property in Westfield, purchased 18 months ago through a trust. The trust has your name on it. Fitch is the trustee. He watched her face. You've never been to Westfield. I've never heard of a trust with my name on. She stopped, felt the cold move through her again, the specific cold of understanding. They built more than one frame. The 14 million was the visible one, Roman said, the one designed to surface quickly and publicly. But there are at least 2 others, slower building, designed to appear if the first one was successfully challenged. They built redundancies, she said, against a defense attorney. Yes. He looked at her steadily. Against someone with your background and someone with my resources. We'll see. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the mountain was white and still, the storm having finally spent itself, the sky above the trees a flat, colorless gray that felt like the calm after something rather than the beginning of anything good. My daughter, she said. She will be born into whatever trust structure Damien controls. Is she in this? The silence before Roman answered was half a second longer than his other silences, and she noted that too. There's a trust, he said, established before your marriage. It's connected to your husband's grandfather's estate. The original beneficiary was Damien, but there's a secondary clause, standard in estates of that generation, that transfers beneficial interest to direct descendants. He paused. Your daughter, as Damien's biological child, becomes the primary beneficiary at birth. How much is in the trust? What we've been able to verify so far, he said the number. She heard it. She made herself stay completely still. She breathed once, carefully, through her nose. Say that again, she said. He said it again. $430 million. That's why, she said. Not a question. Her voice came out very quiet, very even, the way a voice goes when the body has decided that showing anything right now is a liability. That's why they needed the baby gone. Not just me, her. If you disappear before the birth, Roman said, and Damien can demonstrate that paternity was disputed, which the documentation they've built would support, by implying you were involved in financial misconduct that predated the marriage, the secondary clause becomes legally contestable. The trust reverts. To him. To him. She looked at her hands. They were very steady. She did not understand why they were so steady, and she did not question it. They were going to kill us, she said. Roman said nothing. Not just ruin me. Kill us. She looked up. That's what you're not saying. I don't know that for certain yet. But you think it. A long pause. Yes, he said. I think it. The forensic accountant, Lena Marsh, was located in the early afternoon, not by finding her, as it turned out, but by finding where she had been. Roman's people traced her last known location to a hotel in the financial district, checked in 4 days ago under a corporate account connected to one of the shell entities. She had checked out 48 hours ago. Her phone had been dead since Monday. Yara delivered this information in the doorway of the main room while Roman was on the phone in the corridor. Serena heard it and watched Yara's face and said, She's not just gone dark. Yara said, We don't know that. Yara. A pause. We don't know that yet. The accountant who built the frame had vanished 2 days after the frame was deployed. Serena turned back to her laptop and added Lena Marsh's name to the document she was building and wrote the word witness next to it, and then drew a line through the word and wrote liability instead, because she was beginning to understand how this operation worked, and in this operation a witness was only valuable until they became a loose end. Roman came back into the room and looked at both of them and said, to no one in particular, The phone's dead, not inactive. It's been wiped remotely. Whoever controls the remote wipe capability has access to the corporate account that booked the hotel, and that account traces back to this Fitch, Serena said. Fitch, he confirmed. She pulled up the legal pad and wrote that down too. Her handwriting was getting smaller as the page filled, more compressed, the notes starting to overlap and reference each other with arrows and brackets. She was building something. She could feel the structure of it assembling itself as new information connected to what she'd already established. And the structure was coherent, and it was damning. And it was also, she understood with a cold lucidity, that she was starting to recognize as her actual mental state when the fear was properly redirected, not enough. We need Marsh alive, she said. Yes, Roman said. Or we need whoever she built the documentation with. The actual files, the source files before they were cleaned up, the trail underneath the trail. We're working on that. I can help. He looked at her. I can read the filings, she said. I know what to look for. Your people are good at finding things. I can see that. But interpreting corporate documentation structure is specific. Let me work with whoever you have on the financial side. You should be resting. I can rest and read at the same time. She held his gaze. Roman, they built this trap around me. I know his architecture better than your investigators do. I know his habits. I know his lawyers. I know which board members he trusts and which ones he uses. And I know... She stopped. Something had just occurred to her, sharp and clear, surfacing from a memory she hadn't known she was carrying. I know where he keeps his private correspondence. Roman was very still. What correspondence? He had a system, she said slowly, working through the memory as she spoke. He thought I didn't notice, but he kept a secondary email, not a work account, not anything connected to the company. A private account he accessed through a specific browser on his personal phone. He used it for anything he didn't want associated with Voss Capital. She looked at Roman. I know the email address because I saw it once on his screen when he didn't know I was standing behind him. I memorized it the way you memorize something you don't know yet why you need. Can you access it? Not without the password, but if your people can, give me the address. She wrote it on the legal pad, tore the page off, and handed it across the table. Roman took it, read it once, and left the room without another word. Two things happened before dinner. The first was that Roman's cyber team gained access to Damien's private email account in under 3 hours, which told Serena something about the capability Roman had available to him that she was going to have to sit with at some point when she had the time. The second was what they found there. Not proof. Not the clean, courtroom-ready evidence she'd been imagining when she gave Roman the email address. What they found was a communication chain, 14 months of encrypted messages between Damien and an address that traced back, through 3 layers of proxy, to a man named Senator Alan Greer of the State Finance Committee. And the content of those messages was not, as she had imagined, about financial fraud. It was about her. Roman showed her the printed excerpts in the evening, sitting across from her at the table with Yara standing near the door, and the room very quiet except for the sound of the fire in the grate across the room. He didn't preface them. He just slid them across the table. She read. She read the message from 11 months ago in which Damien described her as manageable and unlikely to look too hard. She read the message from 8 months ago, dated 1 week after she'd told Damien she was pregnant, in which he wrote to Greer that the timeline needs acceleration and that the secondary problem resolves itself if the primary is handled correctly. She read the message from 3 months ago, shortly after Curtis Bell had approached Roman's associates, in which Damien wrote, in plain language that demonstrated the specific confidence of a man who believed his communications were unassailable. The wife becomes the frame holds, and the child never becomes a legal complication because there won't be a child. She set the papers down. She sat very still for a long moment. There won't be a child. She had known this abstractly, in the way you know a thing when the logic points clearly to it even before the evidence arrives. She had said it herself that morning, to Roman in that same clinical voice, they were going to kill us. She had understood it as a strategic conclusion, a logical inference from the architecture of what was being built around her. Reading it in Damien's words was something else. She breathed in, she breathed out. She put her hand on her belly and felt her daughter move. One slow shift, a knee or an elbow pressing outward, alive and insistent. And she kept her face completely composed because she had decided sometime in the last 24 hours that composure was the only remaining thing she owned outright, and she was not giving it up. Senator Greer, she said. Sits on 3 federal oversight committees, Roman said. His voice was neutral, but something underneath it wasn't. Including the one that would have jurisdiction over any federal investigation into Voss Capital. He's the insurance policy. He's one of them. How many? Roman was quiet for a moment. We're still counting. She looked at the papers, then at him. This changes your exposure level significantly, she said. You're already connected to me. If they know I came to you, they don't know yet. Yet, he agreed. So you have a window, she said, during which you could very reasonably hand me off to someone else. Law enforcement, a shelter, another safe location that has no connection to you, and walk away from this before it costs you something you can't replace. He looked at her without answering for long enough that she thought she'd miscalculated something. Then he said, I'm aware of that. And I'm still here. She studied his face. The fire was low, but it put light across the angles of it, and she thought that this was a man who had made many decisions in his life by the same method she was using right now, stripping the situation to its functional components and responding to what was actually there rather than what was easier to believe. Why? She asked. Not testing him, genuinely needing to understand the mechanism because her survival had become dependent on understanding the motivations of the people around her, and she couldn't afford to be wrong about this one. He was quiet for a moment. I had a daughter, he said. She was 4. There was a situation, a decision I made for business reasons, a tactical choice. Someone used her to send me a message. He stopped. His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened, once, briefly, and then released. I handled it. The people involved are not a consideration anymore, but I made a choice that put her in a position where she could be used against me, and I live with that. Silence. She's alive, he said. She's with her mother somewhere I won't tell you, somewhere safe. She doesn't know what I do, and I will not be a regular part of her life because a regular part of my life is not safe for a child. He looked at her steadily. But she exists, and she's healthy, and that was not an outcome I was entitled to after the choices I made. Serena looked at him for a long time. So this is debt, she said quietly. Call it whatever you want, he said. She nodded slowly. She picked up the papers and aligned them carefully and set them back on the table face down, because she was done looking at Damien's words for tonight, and possibly for the rest of her life. What's our next move? She said. Roman opened his mouth to answer, and then his phone rang. Not the number he kept in his pocket, the other one, the one she had seen him check twice since she'd arrived and never answer casually. He looked at the screen. Something in his posture changed, almost nothing, barely visible, and she knew immediately that whatever the call was, it was not the call they had been expecting. He answered, listened for 8 seconds without speaking. Then he looked at Yara and said, in a voice that was entirely flat and entirely controlled, and therefore more alarming than any raised voice would have been, "Get her to the lower level, now!" Yara was already moving. "What's happening?" Serena said, pushing back from the table, one hand going automatically to the underside of her belly. Roman was already heading for the door. Over his shoulder, not breaking stride, he said, "They found us." And somewhere outside the stone walls of the compound, in the white silence of the mountain dark, she heard, very faintly, then not faintly at all, the sound of vehicles. They came in from the north access road. Serena knew this because she could hear the difference in the engine sounds as Yara moved her fast through the interior corridor. The compound's stone walls didn't muffle so much as redirect sound, channeling it along the hallways in strange, specific ways, and the vehicles coming up the north approach hit a particular frequency against the mountain face that was distinct from the southern road she had arrived on. She did not know how she knew this. She cataloged it anyway. Yara had one hand on Serena's arm and was moving at the fastest pace Serena's body would allow, which was not fast enough, a fact they both understood without discussing it. The lower level was accessed through a door at the end of the main corridor that looked like a wall panel, until Yara pressed a specific point in the stone, and it swung inward on hydraulic hinges that made almost no sound at all. "Steps," Yara said. 12 of them. Hold the rail." Serena held the rail. She went down the steps, one at a time, with her free hand braced against the opposite wall. Her breath already shortened, not by fear entirely, but by the physical reality of moving quickly at 8 months pregnant down a narrow staircase in low light, while her body sent her periodic reminders that it was still, at some level, trying to begin a labor process that had been chemically interrupted 20 hours ago. The lower level was not a basement in the decorative sense. It was a bunker, reinforced concrete, low ceilings, ventilation that hummed at a steady pitch, lighting that ran off a separate power source from the rest of the compound. There were monitors along one wall showing feeds from the exterior cameras. 2 of Roman's men were already down here, both armed, both watching the screens. Serena looked at the screens. The north camera showed 3 vehicles stopped at the outer gate. Black, unmarked, but not the matte tactical black of Roman's convoy. These were civilian black, the kind of black that was meant to look unremarkable. The gate was closed. 2 men stood outside the lead vehicle, and even in the grainy camera resolution, she could see that they were not positioned the way law enforcement positioned themselves at a gate. They were positioned the way men positioned themselves when they had already decided they were going in and were simply deciding how. "How did they find this location?" she said. One of Roman's men, she didn't know his name, had not been introduced. He was simply present in the way that Roman's people were present, thorough and deliberate, said, without looking away from the screens, "Working on that." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Yara positioned herself between Serena and the staircase, and Serena understood the geometry of that without having to be told. She moved to the wall beside the monitors and stood with her back to the concrete and watched the screens and breathed. Above them, she could hear movement. Multiple sets of footsteps, organized, purposeful. Roman's people relocating, setting positions. The compound had gone from a recovery location to a defensive one in the span of 4 minutes, and the efficiency of that transition told her something about how this place had been built and what it had been built for. She thought about Halverson, who had been in a room on the upper floor the last time she'd seen her. She thought about the baby, who was currently pressed against the underside of her ribs and kicking with what felt like either anxiety or enthusiasm, and she chose to interpret it as enthusiasm. Then Roman came down the stairs and the room changed. Not dramatically. He didn't raise his voice or change his pace. He simply arrived with a quality of attention that reorganized everything around it, the way a high-pressure system reorganizes weather. He looked at the monitors, looked at Serena, and then looked at the man who had said working on that. "Kellner," he said. "Tell me." Kellner, that was the name then, said, "Vehicle transponder, one of the support cars. The transponder was registered to the convoy correctly, but it's broadcasting a secondary signal we didn't know was there. Passive, low frequency, would have been invisible to a standard sweep." He paused. "It's a professional plant, not recent." Roman's face didn't move. "How long has it been transmitting?" "Unknown. Could be weeks, could be longer." "Meaning they've known where our vehicles are for potentially weeks," Serena said. "Meaning they could have known about the pickup last night before it happened," Roman said. She heard what he was not saying. The convoy had been on that road, on that particular road through the blizzard, before she collapsed on the shoulder. Whatever route Roman had been traveling, someone had known it in advance. "They didn't find me by accident," she said. "You didn't find me by accident. They put me on that road." The room was very quiet. "Damien knew the convoy route," she said, working through it aloud because she needed to hear the logic to trust it. "Or someone connected to him did. They put me on that highway in those conditions knowing that your convoy—" She stopped. The full shape of it settled into place with the specific terrible clarity of something that has been true for a long time and is only now visible. "They wanted you to pick me up." Roman looked at her. "I wasn't an accident you found," she said. "I was bait." Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Kellner said, very quietly, "That would mean they know who you are, Roman." "They've known who I am for years," Roman said. He said it without inflection, the way you say something that is simply a condition of your life rather than new information. "They know your roots," Kellner said. "They know your assets. If the transponder's been active for weeks, we deal with what's at the gate," Roman said. "Pull full camera coverage. I want eyes on every approach. And get Halverson down here." Kellner moved. Yara moved. Serena stayed where she was against the wall and looked at Roman, and he looked back at her with the expression of a man who has just updated a significant piece of his operational understanding and is deciding, in real time, what to do with the update. "You picked me up anyway," she said. "Yes." "Even if you'd known I was bait, would you have left me on the road?" He said nothing for long enough that it became its own kind of answer. "What's at the gate?" she said. "Who are they?" "Not police," he said. "The positioning is wrong. Law enforcement announces these men are staging." He looked at the monitor. "Mercenary contract. Private security or hired tactical, which means someone paid for them, which means there's a paper trail if we can find the right end of it." "Gerald Fitch," she said. "Fitch or someone above Fitch." "You said he had people above him when you told me about the network." "Yes." "Who's above Fitch?" Roman was quiet again, and this time the quality of the quiet was different. Not the silence of a man calculating his response, but the silence of a man deciding whether to give it. "Tell me," she said. "There's a name that's appeared 3 times in our research across 3 separate financial structures," Roman said carefully. "Not in any filing, not in any document. in conversations, recorded, in 2 cases, reported, in 1. The name is Harlan Voss. Serena's whole body went cold. That's Damien's father, she said. Yes. Damien's father is dead. He died 6 years ago. He died, Roman said, according to a death certificate filed in a jurisdiction that has subsequently been identified as having significant corruption in its records office, and according to an estate filing that was handled entirely by Gerald Fitch. She stared at him. We can't confirm it yet, Roman said, but 3 separate sources have placed a man using Harlan Voss's identity in communications related to this operation. One of those sources is Curtis Bell, who made a reference in a recorded conversation to the senior partner in a context that doesn't match anyone currently listed in Voss Capital's structure. Damien's father faked his death, she said. Each word came out separately, with space between them, because she was testing the sentence to see if it held. Damien's father possibly faked his death, Roman said, and has been operating this network from behind it for 6 years, using his son as the public face, using your marriage as a structural layer, and using... He stopped. She watched his face. Something had crossed it. Not hesitation. Roman didn't hesitate. But something that looked like a man arriving at the edge of information he had decided not to give her and reconsidering that decision. Say it, she said. The trust, he said. The $430 million. It was established by Harlan Voss before his death. The secondary beneficiary clause that names Damien's direct descendants, that clause was not in the original trust document. She was very still. It was added, Roman said, 8 months ago. 8 months ago. The exact month she had told Damien she was pregnant. Someone added a clause making my daughter the primary beneficiary, she said very slowly, at the exact moment they found out she was going to exist. Yes. Why would Harlan Voss add a clause that transfers his money away from his son? Because, Roman said, according to what we've been able to reconstruct, Harlan Voss added that clause himself, not to protect the child, to protect the money from Damien. He paused. We think Damien has been skimming, not from the client, from his father. Small amounts over years through accounts Harlan's structure wasn't set up to monitor directly. When Harlan found out, he moved the money into the trust with his grandchild as beneficiary, effectively locking Damien out of his own inheritance. So Damien needed the baby gone, Serena said, not just because of the fraud exposure, because his father cut him out and the only way back to the money is if the secondary beneficiary doesn't exist. Yes. And Harlan... She stopped. Harlan doesn't know I'm here. No. Does Harlan know his son tried to have his grandchild killed? A pause that lasted 1 full second longer than Roman's other pauses. We don't know, he said. That's the question we can't answer yet. Above them, something moved, not footsteps this time, something heavier, then a sound she couldn't classify, brief and muffled, and then nothing. Roman looked at the ceiling, then at Kellner, who was watching the monitors with the specific rigidity of someone seeing something he doesn't want to report. Kellner, Roman said. They're through the gate, Kellner said. I don't know how, the gate is rated. They're through it. 3 vehicles approaching the main entrance. Roman turned. He said something to the second man whose name she still didn't know, and the man moved immediately toward a cabinet on the far wall, opened it, and began removing weapons with the focused efficiency of someone conducting a routine task rather than preparing for a firefight. Because to him it was routine. She understood that now. Serena, Roman turned to her. There's a secondary exit, eastern wall, 20 meters down this corridor. He was already moving, gesturing to Yara, who had reappeared from the corridor. Yara takes you out. There's a vehicle staged 40 meters east of the exit, keys in the column. The road leads north for 6 miles and then connects to Route 43. Do not stop. Do not use your phone. There is a location. He produced a card from his pocket, already prepared, already written, and pressed it into her hand. This address. You go there. You tell them Roman sent you. She looked at the card, then at him. What about you? She said. I'll be fine. That's not what I asked. He looked at her for 1 moment, just one, measured, containing something she couldn't fully read. And then he said, I'll find you at the address. Go. Yara took her arm. She went. Let. The corridor was longer than 20 meters. Or it felt longer. The kind of distance that expands under pressure. Each step more effortful than the arithmetic suggested it should be. Yara moved fast and Serena kept pace, and behind them she could hear, filtering down through the concrete, the sounds of the compound's upper level responding to an approach. Commands, low and sharp, movement, and then, muffled but unmistakable, the first gunshot. Her stride broke. Just for a half step, a single involuntary deceleration. Keep moving, Yara said, not looking back. I know, keep moving. The eastern exit was a steel door recessed into the concrete, operated by a keypad that Yara coded without slowing. It opened outward into cold, immediate and absolute after the regulated temperature of the bunker, the night air hitting Serena's face with the specific aggression of mountain winter at midnight. The snow that had fallen was crusted now, hard and reflective under a sky that had cleared while she'd been underground, and she could see the tree line 40 meters ahead and the dark shape of a vehicle pulled under the canopy of the nearest trees. They moved across the open ground at a near run. Serena's boots found the crusted snow with a crunching regularity that seemed too loud in the silence. Behind her she heard nothing from the compound, which was somehow worse than the sound of the single gunshot had been. The nothing meant that whatever was happening was either contained or concluded, and she didn't know which. The vehicle was a dark Range Rover, civilian, older than the compound's other assets, keys in the column as promised. Yara took the driver's seat without discussion and had the engine running before Serena's door was fully closed. They moved north through the trees on a road that was barely a road, 2 tire tracks in the snow, packed by previous use, winding through terrain that required Yara's absolute focus. She drove with both hands at the top of the wheel, her eyes fixed ahead, and said nothing. Serena said nothing either for approximately 4 minutes. Then, "How long have you worked for Roman?" 7 years. "Have you done this before? Moved someone out under fire?" "Yes. Recently." 6 months ago." "Who?" Yara glanced at her once, briefly. "Someone who needed moving." Serena looked at the trees moving past the window and thought about a man who had, 6 months ago, moved someone who needed moving, and 3 months ago had declined a $200 million facilitation deal, and last night had stopped a convoy on a highway in a blizzard for a woman with 2 bags and an 8-month pregnancy. She thought about what he'd told her, the daughter, the choice, the specific weight he carried from it. She thought about the card in her hand. She looked at the card. An address in a town she'd never heard of, handwritten in Roman script, which was smaller and more precise than she'd expected. Below the address, a single line. "Tell them the word is halcyon." "Yara," she said. "What?" "The transponder in the vehicle. The one that led them to the compound." She paused. "When was the last time Roman's vehicles were serviced?" "Every 6 weeks. We have a mechanic, contracted, long-term, fully vetted." "Fully vetted by whom?" Yara's hands tightened on the wheel. A visible adjustment, a microscopic increase in grip, and Serena watched it and felt the answer before Yara gave it. "The vetting goes through a security coordinator," Yara said carefully. "Someone who manages all external contractors, background checks, payment, scheduling." "Who is the coordinator?" A long pause. Long enough that the trees had changed character around them, the mountain giving way to a lower elevation, the road widening slightly. "His name is Dario," Yara said. "He's been with Roman for 4 years." "Has anyone checked where Dario is tonight?" The silence this time was not a pause. It was the sound of Yara running the calculation and arriving at an answer that she didn't want to say out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real. "Call Roman," Serena said. "I'm not supposed to use the—" "Call Roman." Yara pulled the phone from her jacket with one hand, thumb already moving, held it to her ear, drove, waited. She waited for 15 seconds, 20. She lowered the phone and looked at the road. "No answer," she said. Serena held the card in both hands and looked at the address and thought about what Roman had said to her that morning. Yet. They don't know yet. And then the vehicle transponder. And then the men at the gate who had moved through a reinforced barrier in under 4 minutes, which required either very specialized equipment or very specific knowledge of how the gate worked. Dario runs the external contractors, she said, which includes the mechanic who services the vehicles, which means Dario had access to every vehicle in Roman's fleet. Yes. And the mechanic who serviced the vehicles, when was the last service? 3 weeks ago. Before I arrived. Before you arrived. So the transponder wasn't about me, Serena said. Or not originally. The transponder was already there. Dario was feeding Roman's locations to someone before I was ever on that highway. To Fitch, Yara said, very quietly. Or to Harlan Voss, Serena said. The road ahead cleared into a straightaway and Yara accelerated, and Serena watched the speedometer climb and pressed the address card flat against her thigh and stared at the darkness ahead and thought about a man standing in a compound with compromised security and a traitor inside his own organization. And she thought about the sound of the single gunshot that had reached her through 20 meters of reinforced concrete. The phone in Yara's jacket buzzed. Yara took it out with one hand, looked at the screen, and then she said, without inflection, in the voice of someone delivering information they need to process themselves while simultaneously delivering it, "It's not Roman." "Who is it?" Yara held the phone toward her without answering, and Serena took it and looked at the screen and felt everything she had been holding together with controlled precision and deliberate composure crack along a line she hadn't known was there. The text was 5 words. "We have him. Come back." She stared at the message. "Dario?" Yara said. Her voice had gone flat in a way that was different from her usual flatness. This was the flatness of someone suppressing something specific. "It has to be Dario. He's the only one who has this number besides Roman's inner circle." "Or whoever Dario works for has this number," Serena said. "And they want me to come back." "You can't go back." "No," she said. "I can't." She looked at the address on the card. She looked at the 5 words on the phone. And she understood with the cold and specific clarity that had been replacing her fear incrementally since yesterday, that the situation had just completed its transformation from something she was surviving to something she was going to have to fight. They had Roman, which meant they had the resources, the contacts, the operational infrastructure she had spent the last 24 hours relying on, which meant that everything she and Roman had built in that time, the financial documentation, the email records, the connection between Fitch and Marsh and Greer, and the $200 million transfer, existed in a location that was now compromised. Except, she looked down at her laptop bag, which Yara had grabbed from the main room during the evacuation and thrown in the back seat without ceremony. She had not processed that detail until now, the bag that contained her laptop, her legal pad with its increasingly dense network of notes, and, she remembered with sudden total clarity, the printed email excerpts that Roman had slid across the table to her, the one she had turned face down and left on the table when Roman's second phone had rung. She had not left them face down on the table. She had put them in the laptop bag automatically, the way she put everything in the laptop bag, the lawyer's habit of keeping documents together, of treating paper as the most fragile and most essential element of any case. She had done it without thinking and then forgotten she had done it. She reached into the back seat and pulled the bag to her lap and unzipped it. The papers were there, folded once, tucked between the laptop and the legal pad. She sat for a moment with the papers in her hands and the 5-word message on the phone beside her and the address in her lap and felt something shift in her chest. Not the baby, not a contraction, but something internal and structural, a reorientation of everything she thought she understood about what she was willing to do. She had spent 4 years being manageable, being occupied, being the wife who didn't look too hard, just as Damien had written to his senator with the specific contempt of a man who had correctly assessed the passivity of the woman beside him. He had been right. For 4 years he had been entirely right. He would not be right again. "Yara," she said. Her voice was steady, more than steady. It had a quality to it that was new, or not new exactly, but newly surfaced, like something that had been below the waterline of who she'd been for a long time, and had only now risen clear. What's the name of the federal prosecutor who has been building a case against Voss Capital? Yara looked at her. How do you know there is one? Because Roman's people flagged Bell 6 months ago and didn't take the deal, she said. And Roman doesn't leave value on the table. If he flagged Bell and declined to facilitate, it's because he was already positioned to benefit from whatever came after, which means he was in contact with someone building the case. She looked at Yara directly. What's the name? A long pause. Reyes, Yara said. Claire Reyes, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Financial Crimes Division. Does she have a secure contact? There's a number Roman uses. Give it to me. Serena, give it to me. She held Yara's gaze. They have Roman. They think I'm running. They think I'm 8 months pregnant and alone and terrified, and I'm going to keep driving north until I reach whatever safe house Roman set up and go dark and wait to be rescued. She paused. They're wrong. Give me the number. Yara looked at the road, looked at her, and reached into her jacket and produced a second phone. Small, prepaid, the kind with no history, and held it out without another word. Serena took it. She unfolded the email printouts on her lap. She looked at Damien's words, "There won't be a child," and felt the sentence move through her the way a current moves through water, finding every channel, touching every wall. She dialed. It rang twice. A woman's voice answered, alert and precise despite the hour. Yes. My name is Serena Ashcroft, she said. I have documentary evidence connecting Senator Alan Greer, Gerald Fitch, Curtis Bell, and Damien Voss to a coordinated fraud and money laundering operation with a $200 million exposure. I also have evidence connecting the same network to the attempted murder of a federal witness. She paused. I believe I am that witness, and I need 48 hours before you move, because the man who has been building this case from the outside has just been taken, and if you move now, you'll lose the evidence trail before it's complete. Silence on the line. Then Claire Reyes said, Where are you? And Serena looked at the dark road ahead and the trees moving past and the card with Roman's address still pressed flat against her thigh, and she said the only true thing she had left to say. I'm still moving, she said, but I'm done running. Claire Reyes called back at 4:47 in the morning. Serena was in the back room of a gas station convenience store 40 miles north of the compound, sitting on an overturned milk crate with her laptop open on a shelving unit and the prepaid phone balanced on her knee, because the owner of the station, a man in his 60s named Walt, who had taken one look at her through the glass door and unlocked it without being asked, had told her she could use the back room and had brought her a cup of coffee and a protein bar and had not asked a single question, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in the last 30 hours that didn't also come attached to a complication. Yara was outside, circling the lot, phone to her ear, trying to locate Dario through channels she hadn't explained, and Serena hadn't asked about. The prepaid buzzed. She answered before the first ring finished. I need to know what you have, Reyes said. No greeting. The voice of someone who had been awake all night by choice rather than circumstance. Printed email correspondence between Damien Voss and Senator Alan Greer, Serena said. 14 months of communication establishing foreknowledge of the fraud structure and Greer's role in blocking federal oversight. Specific language in one message constituting direct evidence of intent to harm a witness, me, and an unborn child. Printed from a private email account. Accessed through methods I won't detail over this line. But the originating account is verifiable. I can give you the address, you can subpoena the provider, the messages will match. A pause. That's not nothing. There's more. Financial connection between Gerald Fitch and 3 of the shell entities implicated in the laundering structure. I've documented the corporate filing cross-references. It's not airtight, but it's a map. It tells your people exactly where to look. She paused. And I have a name. Harlan Voss. Damien's father. Harlan Voss is dead. Harlan Voss has a fraudulent death certificate prepared by Gerald Fitch in a corrupted records jurisdiction, Serena said. He's been operating this network from behind a fake death for 6 years. He's the architect. Damien is the facade. The silence on the line lasted 4 full seconds. She counted them. If that's true, Reyes said slowly, then this is significantly larger than what I've been building toward. I know. I need everything you have, physically, tonight. I need something first, Serena said. Roman Sorrento was taken from a private compound in the northern range approximately 90 minutes ago by a tactical team connected to this operation. He's the person who has been building the external case. He has source material I don't have physical copies of. Before you move on anyone in this network, I need him out. Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear Reyes breathing, not anxious, calculating. Sorrento is not a name I can work with officially, Reyes said. I'm not asking you to work with it officially. I'm asking you to find him before the people who took him decide he's less valuable alive. Do you know where they'd take him? I know who has him, Serena said, and I think I know where. She looked at the legal pad on the shelf, at the name she had written there earlier in the night, and bracketed twice because it kept surfacing in the architecture of everything. There's a property in Westfield, a residential property purchased through a trust that has my name on it. Planted there, I didn't know it existed until last night. Gerald Fitch is the trustee. It's a location that's clean on paper. My name on the trust means if anyone investigates the property, the first thing they find is a fraud suspect, not a network hub. It's the same logic they used with everything else. Put my name on things that need to look legitimate. You think they're holding Sorrento at a property registered to you. I think they're holding him somewhere they can afford to be seen near. And a trust property with a fraud suspect's name attached is exactly the kind of location a man like Fitch would find elegant. She picked up the coffee Walt had brought her and drank half of it without tasting it. I'm going to Westfield. Serena, I'm going to Westfield, she said again, more quietly. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you where I'll be, so that when you're ready to move, you know where to move. A long silence. How far along are you? Reyes said. 8 months. You're out of your mind. Yes, Serena agreed. I know where the property is. You can have everything I have physically in Westfield, or you can wait until morning and I'll mail it to you. Another pause, and then, in a voice that had shed its official register and become something more direct, don't get yourself killed. I've spent 2 years on this case and I'm not losing the best witness I have because she decided to play tactical. I'm not playing anything, Serena said. I'm finishing it. She hung up. Westfield was 60 miles south. She drove while Yara slept in the passenger seat. Genuinely slept, head against the window, the deep, functional sleep of someone who had trained themselves to recover in fragments. And Serena drove through the early morning dark with the heater running and the legal pad propped against the steering wheel at red lights so she could add to it. And she thought about Damien, not about what he'd done. She'd finished processing that in the back room of Walt's gas station, somewhere between the second cup of coffee and the call to Reyes. She thought about how she had known him, the specific texture of knowing someone who is deceiving you, the moments that should have been signals and weren't, not because she was stupid, but because she had been in proximity. And proximity to a practiced deceiver produces a kind of noise that makes the signals very hard to separate from everything else. She thought about the morning she'd told him she was pregnant, the look on his face. She had read it as overwhelmed, the adjustment of a controlled man encountering something he couldn't schedule. She understood now that she had been right about the overwhelmed part and completely wrong about the cause. He hadn't been adjusting to the news of a child. He'd been calculating the new constraint. 1 week later, Harlan Voss had added the trust clause. She wondered if Damien had called his father the day she told him. She wondered what that conversation had sounded like. The son who had been stealing from his father, calling to report that an heir now existed who would legally displace him from the inheritance he'd been quietly gutting for years. She wondered if Harlan had felt something when he heard that news. Whether there was anything in a man who faked his own death and let his son run a criminal empire that could still respond to the information that a grandchild was coming. She did not particularly expect that there was, but she noted the question because the question mattered tactically. If Harlan was not simply a dead man with a fake certificate, but a man with some remaining capacity for something other than pure calculation, that was information. Leverage has to attach to something. You can't leverage a man who wants nothing. Everyone wants something. The Westfield property appeared on the county record she'd pulled up on her laptop as a single-family residence on a 3-acre lot, purchased 4 years ago, currently listed as vacant pending renovation. It had a Fitch-connected property management company listed as the contact. It sat on a private road accessible from the main county route through a gated entry. She stopped the car a quarter-mile from the gate and looked at the property layout on her screen and woke Yara. Yara came awake without transition, one moment out, the next fully present, scanning the car's interior and the road outside before she'd said a word. "Westfield," Serena said. "Property ahead. I think Roman is there." Yara looked at the screen, looked at the dark road. "How many people?" "Unknown. We can't go in without knowing." "I'm not going in," Serena said. "You are." "I'm going to the front gate." Yara looked at her. "They want me," Serena said. "That's why the text said, 'Come back.' They're not done with me because I'm still the living witness to everything, and I still carry the documentation, and I carry the child. As long as I'm loose, the case against me is loose, and the case against me is the only thing keeping the 14 million frame from collapsing under scrutiny." She met Yara's eyes. "If I go to the front gate, they'll open it. Every person inside that building will be looking at me. You go around." "You're bait," Yara said. Not an objection, a confirmation. "I've been bait since day one," Serena said. "At least this time I'm choosing it." Yara looked at her for a long moment with an expression that contained something Serena hadn't seen on her face before. Not quite respect, something more complicated than that. The look of someone reassessing a calculation they thought they'd already completed. "Give me 8 minutes," Yara said. "Count them before you go to the gate." She was out of the car before Serena could respond. A sec. Serena counted 8 minutes on the dashboard clock and then drove to the gate. It was a simple gate, black iron, keypad entry, camera mounted on the right post. She stopped the car with the headlights on the gate and got out, which took longer than it used to and required a specific sequence of movements. Hand on the door frame, weight forward, the compensating shift of her lower body that pregnancy had made necessary and that she barely noticed anymore. It had become so thoroughly built into how she moved. She stood in the headlights and looked directly at the camera. For 6 seconds, nothing happened. Then a voice from a speaker panel she hadn't seen. "You were told to come back." "I'm here," she said. "Alone?" She spread her hands at her sides. Let them see the lines of her. The coat, the belly, the absence of anything in her hands. "Open the gate." A pause of 10 seconds. Then the gate moved. She drove through slowly. The main house at the end of the private road was larger than the county listing had implied. The renovation cover explained the permitted size, she understood. If the property record showed a structure under renovation, a significantly larger footprint could be attributed to construction expansion. The house had exterior lighting running, but unevenly, operational in front, dark on the east and north sides, which was consistent with the location being used practically rather than maintained. She parked in front of the main entrance and got out again and stood beside the car. 2 men came out of the front entrance, both armed, both with the specific physical presentation of hired security rather than career organization. The equipment was expensive, but the way they wore it was slightly wrong, too deliberate, the way someone carries gear they haven't worn long enough for it to feel like their own skin. She filed that away. "Inside," the first one said. She went inside. The interior was stripped, furniture minimal, the renovation cover having provided the excuse to remove everything that would make the space feel occupied. The floor was concrete subflooring. The walls had been prepped for drywall that hadn't been installed. Bare bulbs on extension cords provided light in 3 rooms. They walked her through to the back of the house, to a room that had probably been a large kitchen and now contained a folding table, 3 chairs, a portable heating unit, and Gerald Fitch. Fitch was in his 60s, shorter than she'd imagined from the filings, with the particular physical economy of a man who had spent his life behind desks and conference tables and had developed a presence that compensated for the lack of physical stature through careful stillness. He wore a good suit even here, even at 5 in the morning in a gutted house on a private road, because the suit was part of how he operated. She understood. It established a register of transaction that he was comfortable in and expected others to adopt. He looked at her abdomen first, then at her face. "Sit down, Mrs. Voss," he said. "Ashcroft," she said. She sat because her back was screaming and her feet were swollen and she needed to, not because he told her to. Where is Roman Sorrento? Mr. Sorrento is here. He's unharmed. A pause, deliberate. For now, that remains true. I want to see him. I'm sure you do. Fitch sat across from her, placed his hands flat on the table, and looked at her with the expression of a man who believes he is the most prepared person in any room he occupies. Let me tell you what I need from you, and then we can discuss what you need. I know what you need, she said. You need the documentation, the email printouts, the corporate filing cross-references, the notes I've been building since yesterday morning. You need all of it, and you need me to sign something that confirms my cooperation with the original fraud accusation, which will be reframed as a plea arrangement that makes the $14 million case look like a settlement rather than an exposure of the larger structure. Fitch looked at her steadily. You've been busy. I'm a lawyer, she said. Give me Roman and I'll give you the documents. That's not quite the arrangement I had in mind. I'm sure it isn't, she said. But it's the one you're going to agree to, because the alternative is that the copies I've already sent to Claire Reyes at the U.S. Attorney's Office go live at 6 a.m., which is, she looked at the bare wrist where a watch would have been, a deliberate gesture, approximately 40 minutes from now. The room was very quiet. Fitch said, You're bluffing. Gerald. She said his name the way she used to say difficult witnesses' names in the 2 years she'd practiced before Damien convinced her to stop. Calmly, without inflection, with the specific patience of someone who is prepared to wait as long as necessary for the other person to arrive at the correct conclusion. I called Claire Reyes at 4:47 this morning from a prepaid line. The call lasted 11 minutes. I told her about the email correspondence, about the shell entity connections, about Harlan Voss. She watched his face very carefully when she said the last name. I told her about the Westfield property, and I told her I was coming here. She knows I'm here right now. Something moved in Fitch's face. Not panic. He was not a man who panicked visibly, but a recalculation. She could see it happening, the rapid internal inventory of his exposure, the assessment of which pieces of his structure were still standing and which had just been declared. You gave Reyes Harlan's name, he said. Yes. Does Sorrento know about Harlan? Roman figured it out independently, she said. The name surfaced in 3 separate source conversations. He was going to bring it to Reyes himself. She paused. That's why you needed him out of the picture, not just because of the financial case, because he'd found Harlan. Fitch was very still. Harlan doesn't know you're here, she said. Does he? She watched the stillness deepen. He doesn't know you took Roman. He doesn't know you set the mercenaries on the compound. Because if Harlan knew, he'd also know that you've been managing this situation without authorization, which means you've been making independent decisions about his network without telling him, which is... She stopped because of the sound. Not a gunshot this time. A single sharp impact from somewhere in the back of the building, followed by rapid footsteps, and then a voice she recognized. Even through concrete walls, even strained, even with the specific roughness of someone who had been doing something other than sleeping for the last several hours. She recognized Roman's voice issuing 2 words she couldn't hear clearly, but whose tone was unmistakable. Fitch turned towards the sound. She lunged across the table, not heroically, practically. She had his phone off the table before he could turn back because the phone was what she needed, and her body was not capable of anything more physical than that, and she knew it. She had the phone, and she was on her feet, and she had pressed herself into the corner of the room with the table between them before Fitch had fully processed what had happened. "Give me the phone," he said. "No." She had it open, was moving through the recent contacts with one thumb, her other hand braced against the wall behind her. She found the number she was looking for. It was at the top of the recent list, called twice in the last hour, labeled with a single initial, H. She showed it to him. "Call him," she said. "Or I will." Fitch's face had changed. The stillness was gone, replaced by something raw and less controlled, and she understood that she had located the thing he was most afraid of, which was not law enforcement, and not Roman Sorrento, and not even Claire Reyes. It was a dead man finding out how much had been done in his name without his knowledge. The door of the room opened. Roman came through it. He had clearly been restrained at some point. There were abrasion marks on both wrists and a cut above his left eye that had bled and dried, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain he was not going to allow to dictate his behavior. Behind him was Yara, who had a weapon she'd acquired from somewhere and was holding it with the focused economy of someone who had used one before without drama. Roman looked at Serena. His eyes moved from her face to the phone in her hand to Fitch, and then back to her face. "You good?" he said. "I found Harlan's number," she said. He looked at Fitch. Something passed between them. Not words, not even quite a look, more like a mutual arrival at the same point from different directions. "How many in the building?" Roman said. To Yara, not to Fitch. "4 outside," Yara said. 2 in the front hall. The 2 who brought her in are between here and the front. Dario? A pause. "Not here." "Where?" Yara said nothing, and the nothing was specific enough that Roman nodded once and didn't ask again. Fitch said very carefully, "You're not going to call that number." "Why not?" Serena asked. "Because Harlan Voss is not a man who responds well to surprises," Fitch said. "And if you call him in the middle of the night from my phone from a location he doesn't know about, whatever you think is going to happen is not what will happen." "You're afraid of him," Roman said. Fitch looked at him, said nothing. "You've been running operations he didn't authorize," Roman said. "The mercenaries, the compound, taking me. All of it off book. You panicked when the frame started developing complications." He glanced at Serena, the briefest acknowledgement. "And you started making independent moves to contain it. And now Harlan's network has a federal prosecutor with detailed documentation and a witness in a building registered to his name, and Harlan has no idea." Fitch's jaw moved. The situation was becoming unmanageable. "Because I was still alive," Serena said. "Because you were still—" Fitch stopped. "Say it," she said. He looked at her and she looked at him, and the distance between what he had intended for her and where she was standing right now, in the corner of his own operational location, holding his phone, with Roman Sorrento free and Yara covering the door and Claire Reyes 40 minutes away from a call she was waiting for. That distance was something she could see him measuring, and what she saw on his face when he finished measuring it was the precise expression of a man who has understood that he has already lost and is only now catching up. She called the number. It rang 3 times. 4. A voice answered. Not old, not frail. A voice with the specific considered authority of someone who has not spoken casually in many years, every word placed with the deliberateness of long habit. "Gerald," the voice said, "this is not your number." "No," Serena said, "it isn't." A silence. Complete and total and loaded with everything that silence could contain. "Who is this?" the voice said. "My name is Serena Ashcroft," she said. "I'm the woman your son married. I'm carrying your grandchild, and I'm standing in a house that Gerald Fitch has been using to run an operation you didn't authorize, holding documentation that connects your name to a federal investigation that is going to reach you whether I make this call or not." She breathed once, steadily. "I'm calling you because you amended that trust. You moved the money to protect my daughter. And I need to know whether that was calculation or whether it was something else, because what I'm about to do next depends on the answer." The silence lasted 7 seconds. She counted every one of them. "Where's Gerald?" Harlan Voss said. "He's in front of me." "Is he armed?" "No." Another silence, shorter. "What do you want?" "I want Damien," she said. "Not arrested by someone else. Not caught in the net when Reyes moves on the financial structure. I want him specifically, and I want his confession on record, and I want it in the next 3 hours before the federal prosecutor moves on the rest of the network, and he disappears into a legal process that takes 18 months and costs me everything I have in attorney fees while my daughter grows up with this unresolved." She paused. "You can give me Damien." "You're asking me to give up my son." "Your son tried to have your grandchild killed," she said, "to get to money he'd been stealing from you for years. I'm giving you the opportunity to make a different choice than he did." She held the phone very steadily. I don't know if you're capable of that, but you amended the trust, so I'm asking. The silence this time was the longest yet. Roman was watching her. Yara was watching her. Fitch was watching her with the expression of a man watching something he had not considered possible and cannot quite categorize. Then Harlan Voss said, Damien is at the Meridian Building, 41st floor. He's been there since yesterday, waiting for confirmation that the situation was resolved. Confirmation from Fitch? Yes. Is he alone? Two of his personal security and his attorney. The attorney is Greer's man, not mine. A pause. If you're going to Reyes, take the attorney's name, Marcus Dell. He's the one who built the secondary documentation frames. She looked at Roman. He was already moving toward the door, phone in hand. One more thing, she said. What? When this is over, she said, and my daughter is born, and the trust is legally adjudicated, I need you to release the claim your estate holds on any asset in my name, including the properties Fitch planted. I want nothing that came from your family's money. Not $1. We're clear. A pause. Agreed. I need that in writing. Gerald will handle it. She looked at Fitch. No, she said. Gerald won't handle anything for me ever again. Have your own attorney prepare it and send it to Claire Reyes's office. She'll be expecting it. She hung up. The room was very quiet. Then Roman said from the doorway, Meridian Building, 41st floor. I know, she said. You're not coming. The hell I'm not, she said. Serena? I have the recording function running on this phone, she said, holding it up. I've had it running since I called Harlan. Fitch's voice is on it. Harlan's voice is on it. I go to the Meridian Building. I get Damien's voice on it, and Reyes has everything she needs in a format that doesn't require a single piece of testimony that can be challenged. She looked at him steadily. I am the person he won't see coming. He expects me to be running north in a safe house somewhere waiting to be rescued. The moment he sees my face, he'll talk, Roman said. He won't be able to help it, she said. He designed this whole thing around me not being able to fight back. He's never seen me fight back. He won't know how to perform for me the way he performs for everyone else. She met Roman's eyes. You know I'm right. Roman looked at her. The cut above his eye had started seeping again, a thin line of red tracking down toward his cheekbone that he didn't acknowledge. You have one contraction in that building, he said, and we're done. I don't care what's on the recording. Agreed, she said immediately. I'm serious. I know, she said. So am I. Let's go. Ma'am. The Meridian Building's lobby was marble and silence at 6 a.m. The overnight security guard behind the desk, the only person visible. Roman's approach to the security guard took 45 seconds and involved a badge she did not examine closely and a conversation she did not hear clearly, and then they were in the elevator going to 41. She stood in the elevator with her back against the wall and her hand at her belly and breathed the way Halverson had told her to breathe and watched Roman's reflection in the brushed steel of the elevator doors. The cut on his face, the set of his jaw, the way he stood slightly forward on his feet, weight distributed, ready. She thought, this man stopped a convoy for me on a highway in a blizzard. She thought, he told me about his daughter in the middle of the night without being asked. She thought, whatever comes after this, she was going to have to think very carefully about what she owed him and whether owing and choosing were the same thing. The elevator opened. The 41st floor was a single large office suite, the kind that occupied the entire level. Voss Capital had 2 floors of this building, she remembered now, a satellite office used for client meetings in this part of the city. She had attended a function here once, 2 years ago, in the part of her life that now felt like it had been lived by someone operating with incomplete information about her own circumstances. The outer office was empty. The lights were on beyond the inner door. She could see them through the frosted glass panel. And she could hear, faintly, a voice. One voice, no response. A phone call. Damien's voice. Roman put his hand on the door, looked at her. She nodded. He opened it. Damien was standing with his back to them at the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone to his ear, looking out at the city's early morning skyline. 2 security men were seated near the far wall, and they were on their feet immediately, reaching, but Roman's people, she hadn't seen them enter the building, didn't know when they'd positioned themselves, understood only that they were there when the door opened, had the room covered before either man completed the motion. Damien turned. He looked at Roman first, because Roman was the obvious threat in the room, the one that took a second to process and then landed hard. And then he looked at Serena, and his face did the thing she had predicted it would do. It failed to perform. Every other expression she had seen on his face in 4 years had been, she understood now, in retrospect, a construction. A chosen register deployed for a chosen audience. She had mistaken the consistency of the construction for authenticity, because she had been close to it, and proximity makes construction look like reality. What she saw on his face right now was not a construction. It was the face of a man confronted with the one variable his entire model had failed to account for. "Serena," he said. His voice came out wrong, slightly too controlled, which meant the control was effortful, which meant underneath the effort something was moving that he didn't want to show. "You look... Don't," she said. He stopped. She reached into her coat pocket and set the recording phone on the nearest surface between them. Set it face up, recording indicator visible. Let him see it. His eyes moved to the phone and back to her. "I've been talking to your father," she said. Something happened in his face. A microscopic collapse of the effortful control, a fissure. And what came through the fissure was not guilt and not shame. It was something rawer, more fundamental, the face of a person encountering a specific fear they have been managing for a long time. "Harlan's dead," he said. "Damien," she said quietly. "We both know he isn't." The silence in the room was total. His 2 security men hadn't moved. Roman's people hadn't moved. The city outside the window was beginning its first gray light, the horizon suggesting morning without committing to it. "He told me about the skimming," she said. "What you took from him, why he moved the trust." She watched his face. "He told me about the amendment. Your daughter, our daughter, becoming the primary beneficiary because you cut yourself off from the inheritance by stealing from your own father." She paused. "That's what this was actually about. Not the laundering exposure. Not the federal investigation. You needed her gone, so the trust reverted. And you needed me gone, so the frame held. And you needed both of us gone before anyone looked hard enough at the amendment date and traced it back to what you'd done to your own father." Damien's jaw moved. He swallowed. "Say it," she said. Her voice was completely level. The recording was running. "Not for me. I already know. Say it because your daughter is going to be born in approximately 4 weeks, and she's going to live her entire life in a world where this happened, and the least she deserves is a record of the truth." "Serena." His voice cracked on the second syllable. Not grief. She did not mistake it for grief. Calculation. Breaking down under pressure, the performance failing at its load-bearing point. "Say it," she said, and Damien Voss, who had sat at the head of a glass conference table and condemned her without a flicker, who had written to a senator that there would not be a child, who had built a $14 million frame around the woman he'd promised to protect and expected her to disappear quietly into the consequences, opened his mouth and said it, all of it, every word landing on the recording like a door closing, one after another, until the room held nothing but the truth and the gray light of an early morning breaking over a city that did not yet know what had just come apart inside it. Damien was still talking when Claire Reyes walked through the door. She came in with 2 federal agents at 6:41 in the morning, and she moved through the room the way someone moves through a space they have been working toward for a long time. Not triumphantly, not with theater, but with the specific economy of a person who has a great deal left to do and is simply beginning the next part of it. She was younger than Serena had imagined from the phone. Mid-30s, dark suit, hair pulled back, the kind of compose that comes from having been tested rather than from never having been. She looked at Damien, at Roman, at the recording phone on the table, and then at Serena, and what passed across her face for one unguarded moment was something Serena understood completely, the expression of someone who has been building a case in the dark and has just walked into a room where the lights are on. Damien stopped talking the moment he saw the credentials. He looked at Serena. She looked back. She did not say anything to him. She had said everything she needed to say, and his words were on the recording, and the recording was what mattered. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. long enough for him to understand that she was not looking at him with grief or with rage, that she had moved through both of those and arrived somewhere he hadn't expected, somewhere he didn't have a frame for because he had never truly believed she was capable of it. And then she looked away. She looked at the window. The city was fully light now, the gray suggestion of dawn having resolved into something specific and actual, buildings and streets, and the ordinary infrastructure of morning arriving without ceremony outside the glass. She put her hand on the underside of her belly, felt the baby push against it, and breathed. One of the agents took Damien's arm. He did not resist. That was the thing she noticed, the complete absence of resistance, as if the performance had been the only structure holding him upright, and without it there was simply nothing, a man-shaped space where the calculation used to be. He was walked past her, and she did not watch him go, and she did not feel what she thought she would feel, which was the resolution of something. What she felt was tired. Deeply, structurally tired, the kind that lives below the muscles and the bones themselves, and she understood it was not only the sleepless night or the labor that had been stopped and started, or the 60-mile drive or the confrontation in this room. It was 4 years of being managed into something smaller than she was, and the effort of the last 36 hours to break back through the surface of herself, and the particular exhaustion of having been right about everything that mattered, and having had to fight to make anyone see it. Reyes crossed the room and stood beside her. "The recording is sufficient," she said. "It's more than sufficient. Combined with what you sent me this morning." She stopped, recalibrated, started again without the official register. "You held this together. I want you to know that." "I want Fitch in custody before 9, Serena said. "He'll start moving the moment he hears Damien was picked up." "He's already in custody," Reyes said. "We moved on the Westfield property 12 minutes ago." Serena absorbed that. Greer. Being woken up by federal agents right now. Marcus Dell. He's the attorney who built the secondary document frames. Harlan Voss named him. Reyes looked at her. "You spoke with Harlan Voss." "I called him from Fitch's phone. The call is on the recording." A pause. "He named Dell. He named Dell and confirmed the Westfield property and gave me Damien's location." She met Reyes's eyes. "I told him I'd pass his written commitment to you, a release of any estate claim on assets in my name. He agreed. That commitment is not something I know it's not prosecutorial, it's civil. I'm telling you so you know the full shape of what happened tonight." Serena looked back at the window. "I don't know what you can do with Harlan Voss. He's been legally dead for 6 years. Whatever jurisdiction he's actually in, whatever identity he's been operating under, that's a longer problem than tonight." "Yes," Reyes said. "It is. I'm not asking you to solve it tonight." She turned from the window. "I'm asking you to make sure that every name on the document trail I gave you is picked up before they have time to coordinate a response. After that," she exhaled slowly, "after that, I need to go to a hospital." Reyes looked at her sharply. "Not emergency," Serena said, though even as she said it, she was aware of a new heaviness in her lower body, a pressure that was building with a patience she recognized. "But soon." Roman was at her side before she finished the sentence. She hadn't seen him move. "Car's outside, Batang," he said. "The agents need a statement." "Reyes has the recording," he said. "She has everything you gave her this morning. She has Damien's confession. She does not need your statement in the next 20 minutes. He looked at Reyes. Reyes, to her credit, said, "Go, Kom." The hospital was 14 minutes from the Meridian building. Yara drove. Roman sat in the back with Serena, which wasn't a thing she had asked for and which she did not object to, because the contractions had returned with a regularity that made the math very clear, and she needed something to press her hand against during them that wasn't the door handle. She pressed it against Roman's forearm instead, and he did not comment on this, and she did not explain it. "Dario," she said, between the third and fourth contraction. Roman was quiet for a moment. "Handled." That means different things depending on who's saying it. "He's alive," Roman said. "He won't be a problem." She let that sit. She had learned in the last 36 hours that there were questions she could ask Roman, and questions she could ask herself, and questions that existed in a space between the two where the honest answer was that she was not going to know everything and was going to have to decide whether that was a condition she could accept. "Harlan Voss," she said. "I've got people tracking the identity chain. It'll take time." He kept the clause in the trust, when he could have removed it after he found out Damien was skimming. He kept the clause that protected my daughter. "People are complicated," Roman said. He said it without irony, without philosophy, as a plain statement of observed fact. "He's a man who faked his own death and ran a criminal network for 6 years. Yes. And he amended a trust to protect an unborn grandchild. Yes." She looked at the passing streets. The morning was fully arrived now, the city in its ordinary motion. People with coffee and coats moving along sidewalks that didn't know anything had changed overnight. She thought about complexity, not abstractly, but specifically, in the way you think about it when you've just spent a night on the phone with a dead man who turned out to be the most honest person in his own criminal organization. "I don't forgive him," she said. "I want that noted somewhere." "Noted," Roman said. The contraction that hit at the corner of 5th and Marchmont was not like the others. She gripped his arm hard enough that she felt his muscle tense under her hand, and she breathed through her teeth and counted. And when it passed, she said, with complete calm, "We need to move faster." Yara moved faster. What? Her daughter was born at 9:47 in the morning. Not in the dramatic fashion the last 36 hours might have suggested. Not in a storm, not in a bunker, not in a car on a mountain road. In a delivery room with adequate lighting and a team of 3 who had been briefed on the preterm situation and who worked with the focused competence of people doing what they were trained for. Halverson had been called, Roman had arranged it, she found out later, from the back seat of the car, and had arrived 20 minutes into labor, slightly out of breath, with the same direct and unceremonious manner she'd displayed in the compound, and Serena had felt, seeing her come through the door, something release in her chest that she hadn't known was wound that tight. The labor was 4 hours and 11 minutes. It was not easy. Nothing about any of this had been easy, and the birth was consistent with that. Long and physical and demanding in ways she hadn't been prepared for, despite the books and the classes and the theoretical knowledge of what was supposed to happen. There were moments when the pain was so total and so consuming that the previous 36 hours receded entirely, became simply a context, and there was only this room and this effort and the specific ancient work of bringing a person into the world. She did not have anyone to call. Her sister had believed Damien's version of events. She knew this from the 11 missed calls and the single text that had followed them, which had been brief and damning and which she had read once and not responded to. Her parents were in Arizona, elderly, informed through her sister's filter. The friends who had remained after 4 years of being Damien Voss's wife were his friends first, and she had understood that fact the night Marcus had said, "I can't get involved," and hung up. Halverson was there. Yara was in the waiting room. Roman was in the waiting room. She found out afterward that he had been there the entire time, had not left, had not sent someone in his place, had sat in a waiting room chair for 4 hours and 11 minutes, in the same clothes from the night before with dried blood still at his hairline, and waited. She found this out because the nurse mentioned it, matter-of-factly, while completing the post-delivery paperwork, and Serena had stopped filling out the form for a moment and sat with that information. She asked Halverson to send him in. He came through the door and stopped 2 steps inside it, and she watched him look at the baby, at her daughter, rapt and alert, dark-eyed, impossibly small, and impossibly certain of her own presence. And she watched something move across his face that he didn't manage quickly enough. It was not a complicated expression. It was very simple, actually. She had seen it before on faces she trusted. The expression of someone confronted with a life they know is going to matter, and recognizing the weight of that. "She's healthy," Serena said. "Yes," he said. His voice came out slightly different from usual. Not soft exactly, but less compressed. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. They say that's good for 36 weeks. "That's good," he said. She looked at him. "Sit down, Roman. You've been standing for 4 hours. He sat in the chair near the bed, not close, the same considered distance he always chose, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room. He looked at the baby, and the baby looked at the middle distance, with the specific, unfocused attention of someone encountering light for the first time. "Her name is Nora," Serena said. She hadn't told anyone. She had decided it sometime in the last 4 hours, in the gaps between contractions when her mind had surfaced briefly from the work of labor and found, waiting there, a clarity about small things that she hadn't had before. Nora had been her grandmother's name, her mother's mother, a woman she had known only slightly, but who had been described to her as someone who rebuilt after loss without making the rebuilding the central story of her life. "Nora," Roman said. "Yes." He nodded once, the way he nodded at things that were decided and correct. "Okay." 3 days later, Reyes called with the first round of news. Damien had been formally charged on 11 counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. Gerald Fitch, arrested at the Westfield property, had retained attorneys and was not cooperating, but Reyes's team had found, in the property itself, a secondary server containing 5 years of encrypted communications that her technical division was currently working through. Senator Greer had retained attorneys and was issuing statements through a spokesperson, but 3 of his colleagues on the Oversight Committee had already publicly requested an independent review of his committee activities, which Reyes described as a sign that his political insulation was dissolving faster than he could reinforce it. Marcus Dell had, in the 40 minutes between Damien's arrest and his own, attempted to move a significant sum from a trust account into a personal offshore structure. The attempt had been flagged by a monitoring system Reyes' office had placed on the account 3 months ago. Dell was arrested mid-transfer. Reyes used the word satisfying and then immediately walked it back into official language. Lena Marsh, the forensic accountant who had built the document frames and then disappeared, had been located in a hotel in another state, alive. She had, it turned out, not been eliminated. She had been hiding from Fitch, not from law enforcement, having understood sometime in the week before Serena's public accusation that she had constructed documentation designed to frame a pregnant woman for crimes intended to cover a $200 million transfer, and that this made her either a co-conspirator or a liability, and she had been trying to determine which before anyone else made that determination for her. She was cooperating fully in exchange for considerations Reyes declined to specify. The $200 million transfer had not been completed. The financial monitoring Roman's organization had placed on Bell's network, combined with the federal hold Reyes' office placed on all associated accounts within 2 hours of Damien's arrest, had frozen the funds mid-structure. The money existed in a suspended state across 14 shell accounts, legally inaccessible to everyone involved, pending a recovery process that Reyes estimated would take the better part of a year. Harlan Voss had not been located. Reyes delivered this last piece of information without editorial comment, which was its own kind of comment. The identity trail Roman's people had begun tracing went through 4 jurisdictions, 2 of which had records access complications that were going to require international cooperation agreements. Harlan Voss, whoever he currently was, wherever he currently was, had built his disappearance with the same structural precision he had applied to everything else, and the dismantling of it was going to be slow. Serena listened to all of this from the hospital bed, Nora asleep in the bassinet beside her, and when Reyes finished, she said, "The trust." "Your daughter's claim is solid," Reyes said. "The amendment is legitimate regardless of Harlan's status. It was filed correctly, witnessed appropriately, in the correct jurisdiction. Damien's ability to contest it is effectively eliminated by his own confession and the fraud charges. The estate attorneys will take time, but the outcome isn't in doubt." "I don't want it managed by estate attorneys connected to Fitch's firm." "That's already being addressed," Reyes said. "I've referred you to 2 independent estate attorneys with no prior connection to any Voss entity. I'll send you their names." Serena looked at Nora. The baby was sleeping with the complete physical commitment of someone who had no concept yet that sleep might be interrupted. Total, boneless, certain. "Reyes," she said. "Thank you." A pause. "You did most of the work. I mean, for answering the phone at 4:47 in the morning." A shorter pause. Something shifted in Reyes's official register, briefly. "Anyone who calls me at 4:47 with that much documented evidence and that many names gets answered," she said. "But yes, you're welcome." of some. She left the hospital on the fourth day, not to the house that had been her home, that was still legally complicated, the corporate entity holding it under review as a potentially recoverable asset. And she had decided she didn't want it anyway. Not the compound in the mountains, which had been swept, secured, and returned to operational status, but which was not her place. She went to a furnished apartment in the south part of the city, arranged by Reyes's office through a victim relocation program, which was a strange phrase to apply to her situation, but which she accepted because it was accurate and she was done declining accurate things out of pride. The apartment was small, clean. The windows faced east and caught the morning light. It had a second bedroom that was empty except for the furniture she had bought in the 3 days since she'd known she was being discharged. A crib, a changing table, a rocking chair that she had assembled herself on the third night in the hospital, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the instruction sheet and Nora in the bassinet beside her, because there was something she needed about that specific task, the simple mechanical requirement of building something that was hers. Yara helped her bring Nora up in the elevator. Outside the apartment door, before she unlocked it, Serena stopped. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. "Whatever Roman has you doing, staying close, watching, whatever the assignment is. I have Reyes's office, I have 2 independent attorneys, the immediate threat is gone." Yara was quiet for a moment. "Roman didn't assign me to this location." Serena looked at her. "I asked to stay on," Yara said. "Separately." A pause. "Why?" Yara looked at the door, then at Serena, with the specific expression of someone who is about to say something true that they have not rehearsed. "Because I watched you go to that gate in Westfield," she said. 8 months pregnant, alone, walking into a location where people had decided you were a problem to be eliminated, and you went in there with a phone and a legal pad and a piece of paper with an address on it. And you came out with everything." She paused. "I've worked with a lot of people. I wanted to see what you do next." Serena looked at her for a long moment. Then she unlocked the door. "You can stay for dinner," she said. "I can't promise anything about the food." Roman came 10 days later. Not announced. She heard the knock and looked through the peephole and felt something complicated move through her before she opened the door. Not surprised, she had been expecting him, but the specific adjustment you make when someone you have been thinking about in their absence appears in the actual space of your life. He stood in the hallway with his coat on and his hands in his pockets, and the cut above his eye fully healed, a thin scar now, pale against the darker skin, the kind of mark that would be there permanently. He had brought nothing. He looked the same as he had looked in the blizzard, in the compound, in the Meridian building, like a man who has reached a settled understanding of what he is and doesn't need to perform it. "Come in," she said. He came in. He looked at the apartment, the east-facing windows, the small kitchen, the rocking chair visible through the open bedroom door. With the same focused attention, he gave everything. He did not comment on the apartment. "Nora's asleep," she said. "I won't stay long." "You can look at her." She watched him. "You came all the way here. You can look at her." He went to the bedroom door and stood in it for a moment, and Serena stayed in the main room and gave him that, the specific privacy of a moment that was not hers to be part of. She heard nothing from the bedroom. After a minute, he came back. He sat in the chair she indicated. She sat across from him. "Harlan," she said. "Still working on it," he said. "He's in Europe, we think. The 4th identity trail leads to Portugal, but the records are incomplete." He paused. "He hasn't been idle. There are indications he's been restructuring quietly, moving assets, adjusting the network's architecture. He's not coming back from the dead publicly, but he's not disappearing either. He's going to be a long-term problem," she said. "Yes." "For you as much as for Reyes." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "He kept the clause," she said. "Even knowing what it would cost him in terms of controlling the money, even knowing that Damien would have to remove me and Nora to get around it, he kept it." "Yes." "I can't make sense of that," she said. "Not cleanly." "Maybe it doesn't make clean sense," Roman said. "Maybe he made one decision that was something other than calculation, and then spent 6 months being surprised by the consequences of it." She considered that. "You think he didn't anticipate how far Damien would go?" I think he underestimated his son's desperation, Roman said, which is a specific kind of mistake that people make about their own children, even people who should know better. The room was quiet. Through the wall, she could hear the faint sound of Nora's breathing. She had become very attuned to that sound in 10 days, had developed a peripheral awareness of it that operated below conscious thought, an automatic monitoring that she understood was not going to switch off for the next 20 years and probably longer. "I'm starting a foundation," she said. "Legal support for women in financial abuse situations. Domestic economic coercion. It's systematically underaddressed in the law. The documentation barriers are enormous. Most victims don't have the training to know what they're looking at, even when they're looking directly at it." She paused. "I wasted my license for 4 years. I'm reinstating it." Roman looked at her. "It's not a thank you gesture," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not doing it because of this experience. I'm doing it because I have the training and the specific knowledge and the anger, and those things need to go somewhere that does actual work." "I know," he said. "I didn't think it was a gesture. I want to be sure." "I know that too," he said. And something in the way he said it, without softening it or expanding it, just the plain acknowledgement of her as someone who does not need managing, made her feel, for the first time since she had stood on a highway in a blizzard, something approaching ordinary. Not safe. She was not naive enough to call it safe. Harlan was in Portugal, or somewhere like Portugal, restructuring. Fitch's trial was a year away. Greer's lawyers were skilled and well-funded, and Reyes had warned her that the political case would be long and difficult. The trust administration would take months. Her sister had not called. She was sleeping in 4-hour increments, and her back hurt, and the rocking chair she had assembled herself had a slightly uneven leg that she hadn't gotten around to fixing. But ordinary, in the sense of possible, in the sense of the next thing being a thing she could do. "I'm going to need an attorney to run the foundation's legal structure," she said. "Independent. No prior connection to Voss or Fitch or anyone in that network." "I can put you in touch with 3, Roman said. "Not your attorneys." "Independent of me," he said. "People I know are good but don't owe me anything." She considered this. "Why do you know independent attorneys who owe you nothing?" "Because I've spent 20 years being careful about exactly what obligations I create," he said. She nodded. That she understood completely. "Roman." She said his name and waited until he looked at her directly, which he did, with the same focused attention she had been the recipient of since the night on the highway. "What you did, stopping that convoy, bringing me in, the 48 hours in the compound, Westfield, none of that erases what your organization does. I'm not operating under an illusion about the kind of work you run." "No," he said. "I didn't expect you to." "But it also happened," she said, "specifically and actually. And Nora exists and is healthy and is in the next room, and some significant portion of that is because of what you chose to do." He said nothing. "I'm not resolving that contradiction," she said. "I'm just naming it, because I think you've been waiting for me to either ignore it or condemn you for it, and I'm doing neither." He looked at her for a long moment. In the east-facing windows behind him, the late afternoon light was doing what it did at this hour, going gold, going specific, the quality of light that makes everything it touches look like it is in the process of being remembered rather than merely seen. "I'm going to be hard to be connected to," he said. "Going forward, what I do, it's going to have consequences that move in your direction if the connection is visible." "I know," she said. "Reyes is going to ask about our relationship at some point, formally." "I'll tell her the truth," she said, "which is that you stopped on a highway and made a choice, and I made choices after that. And we're both still here." He was quiet. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that too. I'm not asking you to change what you do, or to be someone different, or to be a permanent presence in Nora's life. I don't have a template for what this is. I don't think you do either." "No," he said. "I don't." "So we don't use a template," she said. "We just—" She stopped, because Nora had made a sound from the bedroom, the particular sound that was not quite waking but was the precursor to it, the first signal of a process beginning. Serena moved without thinking, was in the bedroom doorway before she'd decided to stand, and looked at her daughter in the low light of the eastern window. and Nora settled, just settled, the way infants sometimes do, the agitation moving through and out without arriving at full waking. Serena stood in the doorway for a moment with her hand on the frame. Behind her, she heard Roman stand from the chair. She heard him move toward the apartment door quietly, the same way he moved through everything, without announcement, without taking up more space than necessary. "Roman," she said, not turning around. He stopped. "Come back," she said. "When you're in the city. You don't need a reason." A pause, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "Okay." She heard the door open. She heard it close. She stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at Nora, who was sleeping again with the same total commitment as before, dark-haired and small and entirely certain of her own right to exist in the world. And Serena stood there for a long time in the quiet apartment with the evening light moving across the floor and did not need anything to be different than exactly what it was. The winter had been brutal. She had been thrown into it with nothing, and she had walked out of it with something she could not have named in advance. Not victory, not resolution, but a self that was more precisely her own than the one that had gone in. A woman who had been made smaller for 4 years and had found, in the worst possible conditions, the actual dimensions of who she was. She had not emerged clean. She carried Damien's choices and her own blindness, and the specific knowledge of what people were capable of, including people she had trusted, including herself. She carried the image of a man standing in the snow reading a text on a phone, turning back toward a compound where his people needed him, and choosing to stay near the elevator in a hospital waiting room for 4 hours instead. She carried her daughter. Nora breathed. The city went on outside the windows, ordinary and indifferent and full of people moving through their own invisible emergencies, and Serena Ashcroft stood in the fading light and breathed with it, and did not know what came next, and found that she could hold that uncertainty without it becoming fear. That was new. That, she decided, was enough.